Turning to my next round of questions, the Fed recently issued a new statement on monetary policy. One of the main takeaways was that the Fed's legal goal of full employment is a, quote, broad-based and inclusive goal. Fed Chair Powell also recently released a statement on racial injustice in which he said, quote, the Federal Reserve serves the entire nation. Everyone deserves the opportunity to participate fully in our society and in our economy, and these principles guide us in all we do, including monetary policy. Mr. Haichu, I assume you agree with those goals?
Broadly, but again, I'm not here to address monetary policy. That's not my expertise, and so I would defer to your comments that the chair made and wouldn't have any further comments.
Well, you do in a sense, because the Fed lending programs, including the state and local lending program that you run, are part of the Fed's exercise of its monetary policy powers. It's been quite clear about that. So don't you think that the goals that I just described should guide how you design and implement the state and local lending program?
We're very concerned about the fiscal condition of state and local governments. As I said in my statement, 20 million workers, 13% of the workforce in the country, and there is the recovery of the state and local market, a state and local fiscal condition is critical to the overall recovery of the economy. We all know
I appreciate that, and I thank you for bringing up that point about the people who work for state and local governments, because if you look at that data, in my opinion, it's pretty clear that the Fed is failing to achieve the goals that Chair Powell and others have laid out. The Fed's corporate credit facilities and other interventions have boosted the stock market, but black families don't share equally in that financial success. They make up more than 13% of the US population, but own only 1.5% of stocks. Meanwhile, the Fed's failure to provide meaningful help to state and local governments is crushing black workers in particular. State and local governments have already cut more than 1 million jobs and are projected to cut 2 million more without federal help, and they employ a disproportionate number of black workers. In fact, a worker who is laid off in the public sector is 20% more likely to be black than a worker who loses his or her job in the private sector. And I think that's part of the reason why the black unemployment rate currently is 5.7 percentage points higher than the white unemployment rate. So when the Fed is stingy with state and local governments and generous with corporations and with Wall Street, it further widens the divide between black and white families in this country. So, Mr. Haichu, if the Fed wants its recent statements to be more than just window dressing, don't you think it needs to do a lot more to account for these huge disparities in its COVID response so far?
Commissioner, I think that we've restored market access for the vast majority of state and local governments, and that translates directly into benefits in their community and preventing more cuts than have already happened. As I said in one of my comments earlier, we agree with you that state and local governments cannot cut their way out of the steep decline in revenues and the rapid decline in revenues that we've seen, but neither can they likely borrow their way out of it. So
I appreciate that, Mr. Haichu, and again, I'm sorry my time is short. Look, I think you have to be realistic about the fact that if no further federal aid is coming from the federal government directly, that the tool that you have in front of you can offer significant relief to state and local governments if you make the terms more generous while staying within the law. And look, I raised two issues in the first round of questions, which were lowering the interest rate and lengthening the loan term. It sounded like both of those were potentially consistent with the legal restrictions the Fed is operating under. The other thing I'm hoping that you can take a look at is something that the chair mentioned, which is changing the eligibility requirements for the lending program. So for example, Guam and Puerto Rico and Indian tribes are shut out categorically from this lending program. Other criteria like the credit ratings and also the fact that you have to be rated by a national statistical ratings organization are also exclusionary. So will you just commit to me to take a fresh look at each of these eligibility restrictions through the lens of whether they serve what Chair Powell called the Fed's guiding principles of inclusion?
Commissioner, we'd be glad to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Haichu. I see my time is up, and I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Haichu, let me thank you for your